On this episode of Death by Adulting, we'll discover what elephants, orcas, and dwarf mongooses, mongooses, something like that, have in common. Hint, you think you got mother-in-law problems, you ain't seen nothing yet. Followed by how to prevent your in-laws from becoming outlaws, 5 strategies for success. Next, excuse me? Don't get your DNA profile if you can't handle the truth. That's going to be a good one. Next, Megan's adulting boss tip of the day. And a new segment, Ask Captain Steve. How to dress for air travel. It might just save your life. Plus much, much more. All on this episode of Death by Adulting. Roll the intro.
I wish that I knew what I know now when I was younger.
It's Death by Adulting. I'm your host, Megan Scheibner, and here I am with my co-host, Dr. Steve.
Yes.
Yes. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
I'm well.
Good.
Thank you.
I've got my Just Pour Gravy on It t-shirt. Okay. If you can see that, Just Pour Gravy on it. And that's my answer to just about everything in life.
It is, basically.
That doesn't, if it's, you know what, just pour gravy on it and it'll be better. So
that's the difference between you and me.
there's a certain philosophy there that works. And if you're a man, you understand what I'm talking about. And if you're not, then you're just out of luck. Right? So on the last podcast, you asked me a question about what my favorite boy stories were, because we have 4 boys and 4 girls,
Yeah.
right? My favorite boy stories. All right, I'm going to return the favor now on this one. And what's your favorite girl story from our 4 girls?
My favorite girl story. Well, it's going to involve the criminals, and you know who I'm talking about. Yeah, our 2 middle-ish daughters. So,
Yes.
yeah.
The ones with the real close set eyes.
Yeah,
the
they won't even
brow.
care. They won't care if I say their names. It's Emma and
Yeah.
Molly, and shout out to the criminals. But they were best friends from the time they were children, like babies, and their criminal activity was always combined with one another.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite stories, because those of you who have kids, you'll understand this. Sometimes they lie, and it just doesn't even make any sense. Like, what? You wouldn't have been in trouble if you told the truth. So I don't get this. But Emma and Molly were habitual bed get-out-ofers.
Get out of bedders?
Get out of bedders. That's the term
Okay.
I want. Yeah, they were get out of bedders. And so, especially at nap time, because they
Yes.
shared a room and we would lay them down. And about 5 minutes later, you'd hear the party starting. And it would be giggles and jumping and all the things, right? And so, so one day I thought, well, I'm just going to catch the little criminals. So I, tucked them in, kissed them, have a nice nap time, went outside, stood right outside the door. I think it was about 2.5 minutes. And I heard the party start. And I burst through the door to catch them. And Molly, who had on a little dress with a tie at the back, was tied to Emma's bed, which was across the room from Molly's bed.
Yep.
And I looked at her and I said, "What are you doing?" And she looked at me straight in the face and said, "I did not get out of bed."
Yes, right. Yeah.
It
Nice.
just didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a lot of those with those 2.
Right.
They ended up being college roommates, which we found out they were going to be roomed together. And we were like, oh, we should pray for the faculty.
We should warn the school is
Yeah.
actually what we did. And
Hurricane Molly was coming.
I did tell the dean or the president of the university. I was sitting with him at the stands once, and I said, "You're about to inherit Hurricane Molly."
Yes.
And he understood later what that meant.
He did.
He did.
Quickly, he understood.
Yes, he did. That's okay. Well, good.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's right. I do remember that episode
Yeah.
with her, adamantly looking you in the eye and saying, "I am not out of bed."
Yeah. And that became a thing. Every time she lied to us, it was a tell. She would say, I know, definitely.
Yeah.
We were like, "Oh."
She'd shake your head like this. Okay, I'm lying to you right now.
right now, ding,
Right.
ding, ding, ding.
Oh, good times. It was just so much fun, right? Looking back at it.
Looking
now.
back on it.
All right. So in the tease in the beginning,
Yes.
I said, what are elephants, orcas, and dwarf mongooses? I'm just going to stick with mongooses.
Is there such a thing?
I don't think mongoose is a thing.
Yeah, are there giant
I think geese are a
mongooses?
thing, but I don't think mongooses is a
Do
thing.
you think that giant mongooses are ROUSs?
You're assuming that there's giant mongooses
Well, if
because
there's
there's
dwarf.
dwarf mongooses.
Yeah.
It could just be that there's normal mongoose and then there's dwarf mongooses.
Oh.
I don't know. If you know anything about
put it in the comments.
We're trying to talk about, put it in the comments down below. And I don't want to hear your nastiness about it, but just give us your thoughts on, maybe we get educated on all that. So what do all three of them have in common? What they have in common is this. They are very matriarchal. So there's patriarchal, driven by the dad.
Yep.
There's matriarchal, driven by the moms. And we're talking about mother-in-laws right now. We could be talking about father-in-laws, but let's pick on mother-in-laws for a minute. It's much more fun.
They're an easy mark.
And so elephants, the matriarch of the herd, if you will, stays with the herd. So you are born, you go off, find a mate, you come back, and you're part of the herd. And mom is there for up to, get this, 100 years. And she calls all the shots. Remember, elephants don't ever forget anything. So she's basically the collective conscience of the entire group. She knows where the food is. She knows where the water is. She calls the movements to the next territory and,
who gets
and the
to
migrations
be with who?
and all. Who gets to be with who? Mom calls all the shots for up to 100 years. Imagine getting married and having your mother-in-law move in with you, and then she calls all the shots for the next 100 years. Okay, that's what it would be like to be an elephant. Same is true with orcas, and the same is true with these dwarf
Scheibner
mongooses.
children, you're very lucky.
All right. So you think you've got mother-in-law problems? You got nothing compared to the elephants of the orcas.
I just want you to picture an elephant. 100-year-old elephant has to be just one big wrinkle. Calling the shots.
Yeah, right. It would just be a super wrinkle.
Well, and interestingly, when we were looking at this, there's one group, and it's gray wolves that are patriarchal, but they're in a continual fight to see who's in charge, which makes total sense.
Yeah, because dudes are constantly fighting with each other over
the woman
stupid
just
stuff.
says, no argument, I'm in charge. But for the guys, they're fighting for...
Yeah, it's much more subtle with women. They just kind of like pull out their stilettos and put them on and go, oh, no, I'm in charge, right?
Yeah.
And kind of do the, nobody else is in charge. But the men are constantly fighting over it, which is just barbaric and stupid.
Yes.
But okay, so let me ask you a question. This is off the script. This is into the much, much more stuff part of what we do. If the world were run by, or if all there were on the planet were just women, what would the planet look like?
It would be very clean. It would be very organized. You would know where everything is. And at any one time, half of the women would not be speaking to the other half of the women. And the ones who were speaking would be braiding each other's hair or going out for coffee.
And that group of who wasn't talking to who would be constantly shifting and changing?
Always shifting. Yeah.
In other words, you're in and she's out?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. That's fair.
That's pretty much how it would be.
Who am I to argue with that? I'm just a man.
Yep.
If the world were just men, let me field that one for a minute. If the world were just men, it would be barbaric. There would be just one war constantly, which it kind of is now. I mean, but it would be even worse. When we went to Ireland a few years ago, and in Dublin there is the is it Trinity University?
Yeah, Trinity University.
Okay.
People will know it from like Harry Potter and those movies.
The ancient library is there at Trinity University, and with all the old books, and you've seen it on many, many movies. It's a popular filming location. And in there's this thing called the Book of Kells. And the Kells were somewhere around the 13th, 14th century. And they wrote down a historical account of what was going on in Ireland at the time, and it was really pretty simple. They could have just stuck it on one page and had it repeated, because the Normans or the Vikings would come down from Norway. They would come down and they would sack the entire country of Ireland. They'd burn it to the ground. They'd take the women back as trophies. And then they go back, and then 4 or 5 years later, after they got bored, they're like, hey, they must have rebuilt down there. Let's go back and sack it again. So they get in their little boats, and they come down, and they burn the whole thing down again, take some more trophy brides, and go back to Norway. And they did that over and over and over again. And you'd think at some point the people in Ireland would just get, kind of like fed up with it, or figure out how to defend themselves against the Normans. Didn't really ever happen.
That is very male. In the much, much more, I'm reading a book right now that talks about Jim Elliot, who some people would know he was a missionary who was martyred.
Yep.
But the tribe he was going to, their favorite thing to do was sit around the fire and talk about every wound when they killed someone. So then I stabbed him here, and then I put him there. And occasionally, if they got tired of their wife, they'd just bury her alive, which is way off the range. There is another thing if men ruled the
well,
world.
there would be no organization. There would just be
Right.
piles of things everywhere. So men organize in piles. Like I know personally where 40% of my stuff is most of the time, some of the time, and that those piles are here, there, and everywhere. And then there would be an odor to everything. There'd be persistent guy smell.
But this is the other one. You don't even realize that
I
men
don't.
do it, but you do it and all your sons do it. Your refrigerators would be mostly empty except for 50 condiments. Like 4 kinds of mustard
and mayo and ketchup and relish
it's a
and
food. It's
yes.
a food group for
It is
men.
a food group. Yeah, condiments are a food group. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it's
I
fair.
agree with that.
It's
All right.
fair.
So this whole idea of elephants and orcas and dwarf mongooses being very matriarchal, and how would you describe our current culture? Matriarchal, patriarchal, something in between?
It's definitely trending matriarchal. I mean, I believe that I am becoming more and more I am woman, here we roar. But there's a fight for that. I mean, it depends where you are in the culture, right? In some far streams of Christian culture, it's very patriarchal, which is out of bounds.
That would be the extremes.
Right. And in
sure.
some far strands of liberal culture, it's extremely matriarchal, and there is a happy balance. But, one of the things that we end up talking about in counseling a lot is in-law problems, because we talked in the last episode about paradigms, and when couples come into us and they're having these kind of paradigm battles, it often goes back to, but my parents expect, but her parents expect.
The extended
yeah,
family
and there's
issues.
a lot of in-law issues. I did a social media question answer thing about in-law problems, and I was inundated with in-law problems.
Right.
So
Okay, so let's pivot then to our next segment. Let's talk about what we introduced in the beginning, the 5 strategies for dealing with in-laws, and so help us out a little bit, Megan, with the two. I always get confused about who's an in-law and who isn't.
yeah, so there's really
the younger couple and the older couple.
right. Yeah, and that's how we'll refer to them, younger and older, because I have in-law children.
So we would be in the category now at this point of being the older couple,
Right,
Because we have children who are married.
Yes, so I'm a mother-in-law, he's a father-in-law, but to the younger couple, which would be our child and their spouse, there are in-laws too. I have a daughter-in-law. We have son-in-laws. And so there's older couples and younger couples, and both sides of it can really mess us up. And honestly, we have 5 strategies for success, but if you just flip-flop them, if you did the opposite, you would absolutely have 5 strategies for disaster. And so often the way we recognize what's wrong is it sticks out like a sore thumb. And so as we're going through these positive strategies, maybe the question to ask yourself is, well, this area is really rough in our in-law relationship. Are we failing in this area? Right? Because we can recognize what's wrong as we're exposed to what's right.
Okay, so let me introduce the strategy number 1, right? And that's this. And we're going to talk in this one about the older couple.
Yes, this is
That
for
would be
older
you
couples.
and me who have children who are married.
So we have a daughter-in-law
our
or son-in-law.
our daughter-in-law,
Yes.
right? It would be for us, for
Yeah.
older couples. All right, and I want you to just kind of riff on this one for a little bit. What is number 1?
Number 1 is this: ask, don't inform. On the day your child walks down the aisle and starts this new leave and cleave relationship, you have lost the right to tell them what to do. We need to ask them if they want our advice. They're a new family unit, and we are on the outside of it. It's interesting when we teach marriage conferences, we talk about how that word leave in Genesis that you hear for leave and cleave literally means to discard like an old sofa. Now, I don't want to be treated like an old sofa, obviously, but our relationship has changed. And so sometimes I'll look in 30,000 foot view of my son and daughter-in-law and think, oh, they're really struggling in that area. I have some ideas that might help. I don't get to come through the door and go, hey, look, you guys, if you would just do this, this, and this, you wouldn't be struggling in these areas. But I can come in and say, I have some ideas I think might be helpful. Would you like to hear them? Which leads to kind of a subtext of this, which is we also have to give up any right to expectations. how I raised my children is how I raised my children. They get to raise their children the way they feel is proper. How I ran my home is how I ran my home. How we did things was our family. They get to have their own family. We need to ask, not inform. We don't get to barge through the door that way.
And I would say what you're describing right now, all those aspects of it, take extreme self-control on our part. Because it's really easy to say, look, I've been there and done that. I got more experience than you do. I changed your diaper, right? And kind of pull out those trump cards and say, well, I'm going to tell you how it is. And you have to, and here's the expression, you have to earn the right to be heard
Yep.
with your adult children, whatever phase of life they're in, whether they're married or not, having children or not, you have to earn the right to be heard. And that means, now you have a foot in the door already because you're their mom and dad. And many times they'll want to come to us to ask us for advice. But there's a difference of asking, not telling or informing, right? We can barge in, and this is true of counseling, right?
Yeah.
And let me make a little plug for what we do for counseling. Megan and I have been counseling for 30 years. We have people in for intensive weekends often. We do FaceTime counseling over
Weekly,
the internet, right? And all of that stuff. And if you are at a point and you think, you know what, my marriage is hurting and I think we need to talk to somebody, put the stigma aside for a minute, all right? And reach out to us. Go to characterhealth.com, click on the Contact Us tab. It comes straight to us. It doesn't go to anybody else, and say, hey, can we talk a little bit about your counseling deal? Because I think maybe we need it. And we'll start the conversation. It's a very gentle way to start the conversation. But having said that, we've counseled a lot of people over the years. And one of the things that we find is, all right, this notion of if you want advice to be received, it's got to be asked for. You can't just burst the door open and say, I'm going to tell you the way it is. If you do that, it's always going to be resisted. It's always going to be resisted. So whether you're the parent of an adult child or not doesn't make any difference. You've got to be much more subtle about your approach and say, do you want to hear what I have to say? Are you asking me for my advice?
It's humbling.
It's very humbling.
Yeah.
And we would say to our kids 2 or 3 times, are you asking me for advice? All right. I'm just want to reiterate that.
Yeah.
I'm not barging in on this.
Yeah.
No, Mom. I want to know what do I do in this situation? Okay. Well, my advice would be, and now it goes over much better than if you just say, hey, you know what? You're all messed up and I think you ought to do this,
Yeah. And just a couple things from what you said. You said we do have a foot in the door. That's absolutely true. But if you shove that door open with your advice or your opinions, that door's going to get shut and it's going to get nailed shut. And then you'll have no opportunity to share any type of wisdom that you have. And now I want to speak to moms just for a minute and from another mother, all right? But stereotypes come from predictable, repeated practices. There's a reason that there are mother-in-law jokes. And it's because mothers, just by the nature of being a mother, we're more invested, we're more intent, we're more observational of what's going on with my child, what's going on. And then we open our mouth when we shouldn't. And you can change that. That's a paradigm. We talked about paradigms last episode. You can change that and make the mother-in-law joke non-existent in your relationship with your child and your daughter-in-law or your son-in-law.
Okay, ask, don't inform.
Ask,
number
don't
one.
inform.
Number 2, and this is now aimed at the younger couple.
Yes.
So it would be our children who are married.
Yes, our daughter-in-law or our son-in-law.
Our
This is
daughter-in-law
how
is
they can be
aimed
successful.
at that age group. All right. What's number 2?
Number 2 is this: don't revert to childhood when you go home. And do you want to talk about this, Steve?
Well, it's really easy. You and I fell into this trap.
Yeah.
Right? And I think everybody does. Because growing up in that home, and especially if your parents still live in the same home that you grew up in and you go back, it's really easy to revert back to childhood.
Yeah.
And you're an adult. You might be the CEO of a company, right? You might have 1 million followers on whatever, and you're a big deal. Well, you're not a big deal when you go home. And it's easy for you to fall into the trap of acting like a 12-year-old when you go home.
Yeah.
And being manipulative of your parents and go, they never include me in anything. I can't believe my mom talks down to me like this, like that. And
Leaving
there you
your
are.
dishes out.
I had friends growing up, they called it sitting in a pile of poop. And you go home and you sit in a pile of poop because you're not getting your way.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what? Go home and be an adult. Be be yourself, but be an adult. Don't revert back. But you gotta think about that a little bit. All right. It's easy. It's really super easy to revert back to that old person unless you are deliberately and intentionally trying not to. So you have to have a little conversation with yourself. Maybe get your spouse involved in this conversation and say, honey, will you help me out?
Yeah.
When you see me start doing the, kid routine when I go home, will you kind of elbow me or say, hey, Steve, knock it off, right? Wake up. I realized that after a while, if I wanted to be treated with respect, I had to act respectable. If I acted like a kid, my parents reverted back to being my parents.
Yeah.
And we'd get in those old bad situations where we were at each other and disrespecting each other. And I'd say, I'm never coming back here again. And so, again, if you want to be treated like an adult, act like an adult, bump up the standard, smile. You can be good about the whole thing and say, hey, Mom, I appreciate what you do for me around here. And I think be encouraging, be uplifting, be praising of your parents. Don't go home, though. Here's another thing when I say don't go home and fall into the role of the child. There are some kids and families that are eager to become now the next adult, the next parent in the family, right? And so folks, there's gonna be a phase in your life where you have to be the parent to your aging parents. But that will happen naturally. It'll become very obvious when that age comes. Don't try to rush into it because I can guarantee you're going to get a lot of pushback from your lucid, able to manage themselves adult parents. And when you get to that age, you're going to be the same way. You're going to be like, whoa, dude, hold on here a second. I'm fine. Now I'm hoping, I'm praying at the point where it's time to take the keys away from me. I'll be there and say, hey, you know what? You're right. Here they are.
Yeah.
But that day ain't today.
Yeah,
right?
so a couple of them
right.
have tried to push it. I had cataract surgery, and they asked if our will was filled out. Like, whoa.
Yeah.
It's just my boss. Now, just a little thing to add to what you said, Steve. Uncommunicated issues become bigger issues. So if you're the younger couple and you're coming in and you are acting like an adult and you're still being treated as a child, just have a conversation with your parents of, I'm really trying to live responsibly as an adult and these things are hard. But older parents, it's okay to say, don't come in my house and act like a child. Yeah. We've had a couple of those conversations where we said, I'm not your maid, because you all want to coexist as adults together.
Right. The two sides of that, and I'll share a little story here in a second. The two sides of that are what you just described. It's easy to go back to your parents' house and do the throw your stuff on the ground and leave your dishes just sitting out and all of those kind of things that if you were a neighbor or a guest invited in the home would be considered exceedingly rude. But you're the kid and your parents clean up after you. I always use this example when I'm talking to groups. And I say, one of the big blunders I made when we first got married was I just threw my clothes on the floor when they were dirty. And when I was growing up, apparently, I don't know, some female came and picked them up and did something magical with them and in that big white machine. And then they came back all smelling good and folded them back in my drawer. And then I wore them again and I threw them on the floor and the magic happened again. So I got married and my clothes were dirty. So I threw them on the floor. And my wife, the fair and lovely Megan, said, what are you doing? I said, I don't know. That's what you do with dirty clothes. Well, she wasn't in on the magic, right, that she was supposed to take care of. And we had some fights over it. I realized that I had to bump it up, right? I had to be considerate of her. And so she said, I'll do the laundry, but I'm not picking it up. I'm not turning it right side out. I'm not chasing around after you. Don't make my house look like a pigsty. Take your clothes and put them in the hamper. And that's all the way to the hamper. And turn them right side out first. Yeah. Well, you would have thought I was given a death sentence.
Empty your pockets.
But here I am acting like a kid after I've been married. And I'm like, that's really hard to do. I can't do all that. Well, you can. All right. That's one thing. Now, the other flip side of it is you're the younger couple. Your mom comes to visit, spend a few days with you. And my mom was really hard on us.
I know where this is going.
Well, my mom was really hard on us in our child training.
Yeah.
She thought that we were too strict with our kids, and she didn't ask. She just informed. So she would weigh in, and she would say, I think you're being too strict, and I think I said, Mom, help me out here a little bit. I'm trying to do the best I can. And I explained to my mom, I said, Mom, you worked all the time. She worked 12 hours a day to put food on the table. All right. My mom had terrible taste in men. And so my biological father was a drunk. That's why my parents got divorced when I was 2 years old, because he was a drunk and everything that goes with that. I said, and then you remarried a man who was even a worse drunk than my biological dad. So my stepfather was an angry, mean drunk. My biological father was a happy drunk, at least, but a drunk. And I said, look, Mom, I had no positive male role models growing up at all. And I said, I'm doing the best I can here, so cut me a break, right? And that conversation with her helped her turn the corner.
It did.
And after a while, she realized that us having structure and routine and organization with our children, and yes, discipline, actually made for delightful children. And the kids were loving, and they were loving of grandma, and they were loving of us. And the kids won her over after a while. But that conversation I had with her was gentle but firm. I was taking the role of an adult in my world and not falling into the, Mom, why don't you stop picking on me? You know, don't be a whiner, just be the adult and explain it to him. You know, you can do that. And she turned the corner, and our relationship became much better after that. So number
you didn't share the best story though.
Okay, sorry, here we go. So Mom came to visit once, and
right after a baby was born.
My mother was rather short woman, very short. And all of the pictures on her walls in her home were on her level because she was very short. You'd walk in and go, geez, why is
the picture down there?
Why is the picture on the baseboard? But, you know, she was short. So she came into my house and said, you know, your pictures are too high. Just like that. She had pronounced it. Your pictures are too high. You need to lower them. She said, I'll help you with that. And I said, no, Mom, they're at my eye level. They're Megan's. We like our pictures where they are. Leave them alone. Now, she was very upset about that. So it was a Sunday afternoon. We all were taking a nap. And in the middle of nap time, we're sleeping, and I hear this. Tap, 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 tap. Tap, 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 tap. Like, what in the world? And after like the third or fourth tap, 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 it occurred to me. She's not lowering our pictures.
Oh, yes, she was.
So I go downstairs, and there she is with a hammer up on a little step stool, lowering the pictures, and it caught red-handed. You know, she's like this. But real belligerent. I said, Mom, you cannot lower my pictures. Fine. If you're going to be that way, I'm just going to go home. I'm going to go to the airport right now. I'm going to pack my bags. I'm going to leave. I'm going to go home early. And she was throwing a little hissy fit, acting like a child.
Yep.
And I said, Mom, and we had a nice little talk about it. I said, Mom, you have to understand, I wouldn't come into your house and do that. You can't come into my house and do that. You're just over the line, right? And so she kind of calmed down and stayed for the next couple of days and went home at the appropriate time. But
so here's a much more added for that. So for you younger couples, notice Steve talked to his mom. So if there's an issue with the child of the in-law should do at least the initial conversation. Like, I didn't weigh in with Steve's parents to start with. He didn't weigh in with mine. Then we came together often, but that will help the in-law relationship.
It will absolutely help. All right. So number 1 on the 5 strategies was ask, don't inform. Number 2 is don't revert to childhood when you go home. Number 3 now is for older couples. What is it?
It's be available, but within reason. Because when you're especially when your last child leaves and they move off in the world, it's time for you and your spouse to turn toward each other again. And if everything is availability to your kids and their spouses, you're going to rob that relationship. So be available, but this is going to sound harsh. Don't let yourself be bullied, because it's okay to say no. If you think about it, the younger couples often say no. You know, no, we're not going to do that. No, we can't come over. No, we can't. It's okay as the older couple to say that too. And what it does is it's a great model for the younger couple of we need to be couples focused first before we pour out to everybody else. And it's unnatural for a mother to say no, because our whole lives we've been focused on filling our children's needs. But it is a season of life to be available, but only within reason.
Yeah, the kids as children are very demanding, and it goes with the territory. But as
they're needy,
right? They're needy, and then as they become adults, hopefully that lessens, right? But it doesn't always. Sometimes they'll stay needy and demanding. And again, the helicopter parent, the resume parent, the snowplow parent, they feed all of that, right?
Yeah.
Because they like that self-importance in their role as a parent, and so they feed it So that child now goes into adulthood and keeps demanding of the parent. And they think it's wonderful. I think it's very destructive to this relationship. There's a point where we are empty nesters and we get to enjoy that part of our life. We never really stop parenting. I mean, in the big picture, we always have a role as their parents, but it needs to change and it needs to morph over the years. A healthy part of that is to not be so available to them all the time, because they will, if you are, they'll be just as demanding and they'll fail to launch. They won't take on, they'll figure it out on their own. Like sometimes I'll get an email. You think about this at work, right? Those of you who work in the workplace, you get an email and it's from the same person all the time. It's that 20% of the people that work for you. And you go, you know what? I'm not going to reply to that because I know that they're going to figure it out on their own.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to do this for them. They're just being lazy. And sure enough, if you let it go a little bit, they'll figure it out on their own. And it's healthy for our relationship. But talk about the texting, and because we have a group text with all of our kids, which is a riot. It's absolutely very much fun. But they'll reach out and they'll go, Mom, I need to call you and talk to you.
Oh, I get.
And if you don't get back to him right away, what do you get?
Then I get mom in all caps.
Mom in all caps.
And then I get mom. And then I get, what could you possibly be doing that's more important than being my mother? Which I always respond with lots of things.
Lots of things. I actually have a life.
Yeah. And the kind of the downside of always being available and not having that within reason, in parentheses there, is at some point they aren't going to need you. And you're going to be hurt. Like, well, I'm always available, and now they don't want me to do that. And there has to be that separation and letting them go be their own family, because you're just going to build expectations.
And that's why investing in this primary relationship is so important. So we'll come back. We'll do a bunch of episodes about how to make this relationship really, really good.
Rock solid.
Rock solid. All right. So number one was don't ask, but inform. Don't revert to childhood when you get home. That's number two. Number three was be available within reason. Number four was don't share your spouse's shortcomings with your parents without permission.
That's really huge.
That's huge.
That's really huge, because what happens...
And now, who's this aimed at? Younger or older couples?
This is for younger couples. Younger couples. Don't... I suppose it fits with older couples too. Although you're probably more likely to share with your own child if you're mad at your spouse. But for you younger couples, don't have an argument with your spouse and then go talk to your parents about it. Because the problem is you'll fix it with your spouse, but they're left with lingering harsh or bitter feelings toward their now in-law, their daughter-in-law, or their son-in-law. We need to be so careful. And I would say this goes beyond just your parents. There's no one that you should be sharing your fights with, your spouse's shortcomings with, without, and here's the caveat, their permission.
But what about the person that says, well, I need to have a confidant. I need to have somebody I can get it off my chest with. And that's healthy for me. It's important for me to have that outlet. What do you say about that?
A couple things. One is there's the only place that we're told to vent, according to the scriptures, is to God, right? He's always there to hear us vent. You're not going to find anywhere else that says, oh, and go run to somebody and vent. But the second is there were times that I needed to run something by another female and say, does this seem right? But I had asked Steve ahead of time who he trusted me to talk to. And it was a small group. But I would say to him, you know what? We're really struggling in this area. I just feel like I need to talk to somebody else about it. And do I have your permission? Now, this wasn't really the case in our families because of who our parents were. But with our own kids, hopefully they could say to their spouse, can I run this by my mom? Or can I run this by your mom or your dad? We ought to have that reputation for wise counsel that they can come to us. But as the older person, I always want to make sure that their spouse has said they can come. Sure.
And the intentional or maybe unintentional byproduct of you doing that was I felt really respected by you. I felt like she's cutting me in. She's not talking about me behind my back. I don't want to hear later that you were gossiping about me or talking to me to somebody. But you showed me the respect of saying, Steve, I just need to talk to another woman about this. Is it okay with you if I reach out to? And the answer was always yes.
Yeah.
Right? It was always yes, but it was done in a very respectful way. And I think that's hugely important. That permission part of it can't be overstated.
Right. It's mutual respect. And it shows respect to your parents
Right.
that they can trust you're not going to come just dump all your problems on them and then go be fine, because moms and dads will carry that.
Right.
And they'll worry like, oh, is this marriage in trouble?
And we told all of our adult children as they were getting married, the ones that are married, before they walked the aisle, we said, look, you're on your own now. I mean, we're not abandoning you, but we're allowing you to launch into your new life. And we're not going to intervene. We're not going to meddle. We're not going to stick our nose in the tent. And there's lots of expressions that go with this. We're going to wait for you to reach out to us. And if you call us and start to vent or gripe about your spouse, the first thing we're going to say is, did you ask them if it's okay to talk to me about this? Right? Sometimes that's a real showstopper. Yeah. Now, they go, well, okay, you know what? I don't want to hear about it. You go back and talk to them if they say it's okay. And then they would go back and they say, hey, I talked to my spouse and they said it's okay to talk to you. I mean, most reasonable spouses are going to say that anyway.
Right. All of these strategies we're sharing, really, I mean, and we have actually talked about this, and we've said we want to be the laid back in-laws. We want to be the chill in-laws, whatever term you want, that our kids go, our parents would be fine with it. Right?
Yeah.
These things help you do that.
Well, it's true. Anybody that you dump something on, they never get the conclusion of it.
Right.
When it gets resolved, they never hear that part. And they now have a bad opinion of you or your spouse, more specifically, because you told them all the negative things about the person you're married to. And then when you two make up, they're not part of that. They're like, oh, now they're lovey-dovey again. What's the deal here? I thought he was an absolute,
Yeah. Or I can't trust him with her, especially with daughters. What we're doing is we want to build bridges of relationships with our in-law children.
Yep.
Not walls of separation.
Okay. Right. Yep. So the final one now is for both couples. Both couples. And why don't you start us off with that one?
Okay. So the general topic of it would be ask how you can help. And that's just an adulting truth. Think of them more importantly than yourself. Ask how I can help. So older couples like us say, how can I come alongside and help you? Sometimes it's with the children. Could I read to the kids out loud once a week? Would that be a help to you? Could I take one child out of the mix? And those of you who have many children know how different your home is when just one is missing, right? Find ways to ask to help. But the younger couple, same for you. Instead of your parents having to come to you saying, we're getting older, we can't do this on our own. Is anybody available to help us? Be the one that says, how can I help you? And we have several of our kids that often call and say, hey, what's going on with you guys? Anything I can help you with? And it just means the world to us. But what it does is it builds those bridges of relationship where we both feel cared for, both sides of it.
Yeah, excellent. Good stuff. So there it is. There's your 5 strategies for how to prevent your in-laws becoming your outlaws.
Yeah.
Right? Something that you don't like. Number 1, for older couples, ask, don't inform. Number 2, for the younger couple, don't revert to your childhood when you go home. It's so easy to do that. Number 3, again, is for older couples, be available within reason. You need to be a little aloof, not available 24/7, right? That helps them to launch and get out on their own. The 4th one is for younger couples. Don't share your spouse's shortcomings with your parents without getting permission from the spouse to share any shortcoming. If they give you permission, then go ahead. But if they don't, then you have to keep it to yourself. Or maybe you take it to somebody else, like a pastor or a counselor or somebody who is a professional in that area. And then finally, number 5, for both couples, ask how you can help. That's a proactive way of approaching the whole thing instead of a highly reactive thing, which it could become rather easily.
Really quickly.
Yeah, very, very quickly. Okay,
yeah.
So let's segue now into our next segment, which is titled, Excuse Me?
This is all you.
Don't get your DNA profile if you can't handle the truth. All right. And we all know that famous scene with Jack Nicholson where he's yelling at Tom Cruise and he says, you can't handle the truth, right? You can't handle the truth. And so the issue here is you better emotionally be ready to handle the truth. if you're going to get your DNA done. So a number of years ago, it's probably 5 or 6 years ago now, I think we did Ancestry.com was the one that we went through. And the fair and lovely Megan, right over here, she had gotten her DNA done, and hers was exactly what she thought it would be. Now, my last name is Scheibner. That's my dad's last name. My mother's maiden name was Schaefer. There's not two more German names than Scheibner, Herr Scheibner, and Herr Schaefer, right? Or Frau Schaefer. And so I was expecting to be 100% German, which is what I was told my whole life. I even took German in high school. I took it for 4 years in high school and 2 years in college. And I was a German exchange student
back to your roots.
Back to my roots, Lederhosen and all of that stuff. And yeah. So I was 100% in on the German thing. And then I went into Ancestry.com and I got my DNA results back. All right. This is not for the faint of heart, but I am 0.0% German. None. Zero. Zip. Zilch. Nada. None. It's a very disappointing moment. It's like that commercial that they run for one of the DNA things where the guy thought he was I don't know, Swiss, and he ends up he's being Norwegian or whatever it was. I don't know. It's one of those others. And so now he's got to make a total transformation, and I had to do that as well. So again, those are lots of fun, those things to do. So what did I end up finding out that I was? All right. So this is fun. I want to bring you in on this conversation. So I was 51+% Italian. Yes. Which explains this, right? I can't talk. If you tie my hands down, I'm just like, I can't talk without my hands. I got to do this. And I love Italian food. And I'm a little darker skinned. It's the middle of the winter right now. We're both kind of pasty white at this point. But in the summer, I darken up to a lovely Mediterranean tan.
If you didn't look so much like your mother, I would have thought you were adopted when we got your DNA results.
Yes, right. Yeah. That's correct, right? Because I didn't look anything like my dad. Anyways, so 51+% Italian, and they show you even on those DNA results where your DNA is located. Right. And mine was located right in the center of Rome, the city of Rome, and it said Vatican City. So I've got two theories here. Now, what's the other 49%? The other 49% was Welsh, British, Scottish. UK-ish, yeah. Right? And so, but here's the connection. Britannia, Great Britain, got its name from the Romans. When the Romans went and occupied those islands, they gave it a name, and the name was Britannia, and the name stuck. So there were Roman soldiers that went and occupied the British Isles as we know them today, and they obviously would stay there. They'd meet local girls, they'd settle down, they'd start a farm, they'd get married, and they'd have children. So you get the two DNA mixes of the islands and Italy, which is what I am. But I figured I probably wasn't a common foot soldier.
Of course not.
No, because I'm more of a sit back and wave at the crowds kind of guy, And so I figured I was probably some sort of senator or governor that came there on a trip just to govern, to see what was going on. And I might have gotten, I don't know, a disease or hurt myself and had to stay. And so I ended up staying on the islands and married, a local princess or something like that. and the two of us got going and had a family. And that's how it started. So I was some sort of thing. Or the other one is, this is much more interesting than that one. I was the illegitimate child of some pope back in, who knows, the 7th or 8th century. And but somehow the British part had to get involved. So I don't know if they took slaves and brought them back to Vatican City or not. But I think there's a much more interesting storyline there than just being a foot soldier who started a farm and
who married
settled down.
Potato farmer. Yeah,
married a potato farmer.
So yeah, the whole DNA thing started because I found my birth family, and I was just making sure they really were my birth family. And Steve kept saying to me, "We have to do your DNA." Well, the only thing I had known growing up as an adopted child was I was Irish, and I mean I clung to that. I am Irish. St. Patrick's Day was my holiday, right? In college, I attended the Catholic services, even though I wasn't Catholic, because I'm Irish. And so I really fought the DNA thing. And then we did the DNA, and I'm like 98% Irish, 1% German. I have more than you.
You get more than me.
And 1% Norwegian, which didn't obviously show up in the height at all. But yeah, it's those DNA things, they're just like shocking.
Yeah, they have nothing but wood elves there in Norway.
I know, and I'm not a wood elf. I'm
tall,
more of a hobbit.
slender.
Definitely a hobbit.
Right. It's like in the Navy, I took several trips to Norway, Bodo, Norway, and Andoya. And it's like there was like a Miss Universe contest that the bus stopped there and they all got off and then they just populated. I mean, the women are beautiful there. Just beautiful.
All right. This is
Yes.
a segue. But do you know what one of my worst experiences in life was?
No. What is your worst experience in life?
Steve took me to Milan, which should be wonderful, but we went unbeknownst to us
Yes.
during Fashion Week.
Fashion Week.
So all the women on the subway were like 6'1", 6'2", 6'3". The outfit of the year was a white button-down men's shirt, thigh-high boots, and nothing else. And there they are, wood elves.
Yes.
And there I am, a hobbit.
Yes.
It was just demoralizing.
And it's very difficult for a Christian man to be in that environment because it's like this the whole time, like, oh my word.
Yeah.
But you know what? When you see them in person, they're they need to eat something.
Yeah, they do need to eat something.
I'm more of a guy who likes a gal with a little bit of curves. Okay, I wasn't a big fan, although it was easy to make fun of.
Yes. So
of all of
DNA,
that.
be
Okay,
careful.
so DNA, it's not for the faint of heart. Just excuse me, and you might be surprised if you ever take a DNA test. In the comments, I'd like to hear about your experience with taking a DNA test and were you surprised or shocked?
Yeah.
Right. Now, if you've made it this far in the broadcast, you obviously like what you're hearing. Do us a favor, hit the like button and subscribe. Hit that bell, the notification bell, because we put out a lot of really great content and you don't want to miss any of it. And we'd love to have you on board. Help us out on this end by subscribing and then also share this episode with your friends. So like, subscribe, share. There we go.
You know you wanna.
You know you want to. All right.
Yeah.
Now, let's move on to one of our final segments, but not the final segment. This is the adulting boss tip of the day. Meg.
Okay, so you're going to thank me for this one. Because most of you growing up in your parents' home, you just went to the refrigerator and you pulled out food, you pulled out ranch dressing, you pulled out eggs, and you ate them, and you were safe and secure, unless your mom was like cray-cray and like living on the edge. So here's your adulting tip of the day. Learn to check expiration dates. You'll thank me. You got to take them seriously because you could end up in the hospital. And if you've ever had bad milk, you know what I'm talking about. It goes in, it goes out, it's bad, but everything has an expiration date. Adults learn to read the expiration date. Do it.
I had food poisoning recently. You don't want to hear the details about that, but it is nasty and you don't want to go through it. And it wasn't because of an expiration date, but I would have felt even worse had it been something that I could have prevented by just looking at the date on the back.
Yes.
Right. So again, that's a good one because, man, you'll be praying to Jesus.
You will, but you'll be thanking me if you don't.
And you'll be
if
thanking
you learn to look at the expiration dates.
Megan, because when something goes bad, it's not a pleasant experience.
It's bad.
Okay.
Hey, we have something new this session.
All right, so now we're going to segue to our next short segment, which is Ask Captain Steve. And I am Captain Steve. I captain the largest airplane of the largest airline in the world. And I love flying my little airplane and taking 280 to 300 of my favorite friends all over the world and dropping them off and picking up 300 more and bringing them back. And the topic for Ask Captain Steve today, and this is in the world of adulting, is this. How do you dress for air travel? How do you dress for air travel? I've seen a lot of people that have a lot of different approaches to dressing for the airplane. I've seen some people get all dressed up still to this day.
Yeah,
that used to be an
your mom
old-fashioned
did
thing.
that.
People would get all dressed up. I've seen dressed up people. Mostly people dress casually, but here's what I see the most of. I see people that show up and they're kind of like in their pajamas. And this is not an indictment on you ought to dress up or be more business casual when you get in the airplane. I'm going to approach this from a safety point of view. You want to have comfortable shoes on your feet. So most people wear flip-flops, they wear sandals, they wear some inappropriate shoe for the airplane, and they're not thinking for a minute that they might have to get out of that airplane in a hurry. So folks, what I'm going to share with you next might just save your life. Now look, none of us want to be involved in an airplane crash or an airplane going off a runway or anything like that. It would be a horrible circumstance in the extreme. But a lot of people over the years have been involved in those situations. And the ones that survived were the ones that were prepared to get out of the airplane. So I'm going to tell you to do this. Wear something that is loose fitting, maybe cotton. Right? Why cotton? Because cotton will burn, but it won't adhere to your skin. If you wear polyester or nylon, those things will adhere to your skin. Wear something that covers you. Wear long sleeves. Wear long pants. Don't just wear shorts on the airplane. And for God's sake, please put on some sort of shoe that you can use to protect your feet and get out of the airplane. Sneakers, lace-up shoes, something that's not going to come off. Because if the airplane has rolled off the runway and maybe it's rolled on its side and there's fire and there's smoke and you're trying to get out, you might have to run through fire and jagged metal and gasoline and those sort of things to get to safety. Wear something on your shoe that's going to protect your foot. It's going to bear up under some difficulty, perhaps in getting out. Get rid of those flip-flops. Get rid of those sandals. I know they're comfortable, but it's a wrong thing to wear on an airplane. It may just save your life. So there's your Ask Captain Steve tip of the day.
That's important to know.
And I might have just saved your life.
Yeah.
All right. So next time you fly, it can be comfortable, but make sure it's something that you're thinking, hey, if I got to get out of this airplane in a hurry, this is the right outfit.
Think smart.
Think smart
Yeah.
when you get on an airplane. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that pretty much does it for this episode of Death by Adulting.
Yeah.
Next time, we're going to share with you the 5 sure ways to ruin good sex. You don't want to miss that episode. The 5 good ways to ruin good sex. That's a little tongue in
Okay,
cheek.
can't wait to get there. Yeah.
All right, Megan, get us out of here.
Okay, this has been Death by Adulting. Remember, as an adult, what doesn't kill you
Just makes you
tired.
tired.